I can feel the bay vibrating like a live wire tonight. The kind of electricity that makes your fingers drum the seat back at Chase and your voice drop when you say the words out loud, because you know how big this can get. And because you came here for clarity as much as hype, I'm going to give you both without flinching. Welcome back to Warriors News Fan Report, where raw truths collide with splash-era passion, and where I talk to you like I'm sitting a row behind the bench. Because we're not just chasing clicks, we're mapping windows. The current state of play is simple and powerful. We're 4-1 heading into Thursday, a start that looks organized instead of frantic, with last year's deadline swing finally landing clean. Jimmy Butler not just wearing the jersey but speaking our language, taking late clock possessions that used to feel like a coin flip and turning them into calm, high IQ reads. While Jonathan Kuminga looks less like a bundle of potential and more like a grown scorer who cuts with purpose, runs with responsibility, and closes with pride. Steph Curry is in metronome mode at 27 a night, leading the league in made threes with that casual, inevitable rhythm that makes coaches sigh. And Al Horford is working his way from phrasebook to fluency in Steve Kerr's spacing grammar. Delay actions hit cleaner, split cuts find hands, and those second-unit trips that felt like auditions now look like rehearsals for playoff scenes. It's a real team, not a rumor, which is exactly why the next part matters, because the schedule circled a trip to Milwaukee in red ink and wrote Giannis across the margin like a warming label and a dare at the same time. And you know what he's been doing. 36.3 points, 14.0 rebounds, 7.0 assists, 1.3 blocks, a nightly physics lesson that turns help rotations into rumors. The Bucks at 3-1 despite losing Damian Lillard to an Achilles tear and patching the machine with Miles Turner's steadiness, and that's where the league's second soundtrack kicks in. A low, insistent whisper that Golden State is the one ecosystem where a non-shooter who does everything else could walk into the greatest shooter ever's orbit and make the game bend in new directions. You've seen the headlines about possible Knicks feelers before the season. You've heard Giannis say the right words, locked in on Milwaukee, invested in the work, but you've also heard him be human about it, acknowledging that minds evolve and that winning sits at the top of his pyramid, not branding. That's why Thursday is a test of who we are and a rehearsal of who we might be if the standings start speaking a different language in Wisconsin and the most stubborn rumor in basketball stops being a message board fantasy and becomes a calendar item. Because if anything pushes him to reconsider, it won't be vibes, it'll be probability. And probability is the only language this front office respects. So let's handle what the rumor merchants never do and make the math speak. This is the second apron era, not the old marketplace. The Warriors chose a hard road on purpose with a $205 million payroll and the mid-level exception used on Horford, which means we're hard capped at the second apron with roughly $2 million of air underneath. And that hard cap has no sense of humor. No taking back more money than you send. No cute aggregation if the end state shoves you past the line. No, we'll figure it out later safety valve. The Bucks, by contrast, live under both aprons, about $178.8 million in commitments, $17 million under the first apron, and $29 million under the second apron, which gives them the right to take back as much as 125% of what they ship in any trade. And that's the key that unlocks the door we're peeking through. If Giannis ever hits the market, his number sits at roughly $54 million, and there's one clean match on our books in almost every construction. Jimmy Butler's $54 million. Now, before anyone gets dramatic, hear me carefully. Butler has already given this group a backbone we begged for, and I'm not out here pitching chaos for content. I'm telling you how the league's ledger forces this conversation if the Bucks' season turns from steady to sinking. Because the cap sheet doesn't care about vibes, it cares about columns. And even if Butler matches Giannis dollar for dollar, you still have to shave an additional $11 million out of our structure to bring Antetokounmpo into the room without smashing your head into the hard cap. Timing matters, triggers matter, and in this rule book, precision is strategy. The second layer is the kind of talent that convinces the other side they're not just surviving, they're building. So every realistic outline includes Jonathan Kuminga. Not because anybody here wants to stop his climb, but because a Bucks front office forced into a reset would demand a runway prospect with star torque, force, length, straight-line violence, and a flashing decision tree that can be shaped with usage. Then you empty the draft shelf, which for us means 4 first-rounders, the legal maximum in a single transaction stream, and you still aren't equaling Giannis's value because the only equal in our locker room is a name that's not leaving the Bay. That's what a serious offer looks like in an apron league. Present tense star power, future runway, and tomorrow's oxygen. But we can't pretend the other side's math is a shrug. Even beneath the aprons, Milwaukee has to solve for clean money shape. So the final line almost certainly gets stapled with league-compliant filler on the Warriors side. Think a Cole Anthony type and a Quentin Post salary solve. Not because anyone believes they're the pulse of a dynasty swing, but because 125% in, 125% out is how a fax becomes a trade call, and the CBA is a lock that only opens for exact keys. That's how you move from idea to itemized. Now breathe and step into the practice gym with me, because this is bigger than a spreadsheet. Our 4-1 hasn't been magic, it's been mature. Butler's voice has reduced panic time, Steph's gravity has stayed sacred, Draymond's pre-rotations are turning film study into habit again, Klay is walking the veteran's line between heat check memory and shot diet discipline, Moody is the adult that makes a second unit hum, and Jonathan Kuminga's timing is beginning to serve as the oil between moving parts. That fragility I felt last spring in late-game chaos is shrinking possession by possession. So if you want me to rubber stamp a blockbuster like it's a new hoodie drop, you're in the wrong room. Dynasties die when they ignore storms, yes, but they also die when they chase ghosts. And the only way to tell the difference is to talk like grown-ups. That's what I'm doing here with you, because Dude Nation doesn't need fairy tales, it needs a plan. The plan on the floor is beautiful in its simplicity. If Giannis stays in Milwaukee, tonight's task is still the right education. Build the wall without surrendering the corners. Tag from the nail on his second step, not the gather. Close with length, but land with balance. Force the ball into hands that aren't his. Shrink the runway, then turn rebounds into organized pace instead of chaotic sprints. It's bully ball patience. Get to the elbows, invert with Steph screening and Butler handling to force switches that give you a clean post touch for Horford or a slash lane for Kuminga, then re-space with Klay and Moody like bookends. That's not just compete, that's control. And if we string those choices together, the fourth quarter becomes breathable in any gym.
Now extend that film to the fantasy. Put Giannis in blue and gold and picture the geometry. Curry forces the weak side low man up a step. Giannis short rolls into empty air. Draymond becomes the conductor from the dunker spot. Butler parks in the mid-post as a late clock bailout and mismatch hunter. Klay's shadow holds the strong side shooter in place because the scouting report still fears him. Possession by possession, you turn defense into scheduled advantage rather than emergency artistry. And in the playoffs, scheduled beats miraculous 7 nights out of 10. That's why the basketball case feels like gravity. It points one way unless a stronger force intervenes. That stronger force is culture, and I refuse to say that word like it's a poster. It's the secret that bridged Oracle to Chase and made 2022 feel like a love letter to craft. Stars breathing inside a system, role players singing inside roles, a coach who can put a hand on a shoulder and say, "Your 6 minutes tonight are our season," and actually mean it. Butler has folded into that with less friction than anyone had a right to expect after his Miami exit. Kuminga has trusted it enough to stop trying to win every possession by himself. Horford understands it because he's lived it, and Steph wrote it. If you drop a wrecking ball through a locker room like that, it better be to build a cathedral, not a casino. Adding Giannis would change the music and the key. More early seals, more 45 cuts, more sturdy pace. A defensive toggle between fortified wall and hot switch chaos. And yes, roles would bend. Who sacrifices touches? Which two-man dance takes priority? Curry Giannis, Curry Draymond, Butler Giannis. Which beloved rhythm pairings vanish when you schedule advantage rather than chase it? On the other hand, the paradox is seductive. The most violent paint driver alive might calm the offense because advantage becomes constant rather than episodic. That's how you aim for inevitability instead of excitement. You want stakes, you want honesty, so let's say the quiet part. If this 4-1 start hardens into an April identity, organized pace, disciplined defense, second unit survival without Steph, then the smartest move may be patience with a sharp knife in your back pocket. If instead we keep seeing the same playoff leak, guards dying on screens triggering rotations that crack the rim, late-game offense turning into ISO tug-of-war, then the biggest swing isn't reckless, it's responsible. The front office has done this before. Durant wasn't just add talent, it was solve what beats you. And 2022 wasn't hope and prayer, it was reassert the schedule. That's why a Giannis lane, if it ever opens, can't be about highlight reels. It has to be about solving the exact failure state that ends seasons. And still, we have to remember the second apron's handcuffs. If you get the math wrong, you end up too expensive to improve and too thin to win, the modern league's worst purgatory, which is why I'm hammering the money instead of playing fantasy GM. This is legacy we're measuring, not just a thumbnail. Meanwhile, the West doesn't wait. If Giannis breathes onto the market, teams with cleaner draft rooms and softer aprons will drop calls on Milwaukee's line with unprotected futures and blue-chip rookie deals. Our edge would not be raw bid power, it would be clarity. No half measures, a package that hurts but doesn't hollow, a plan that sells role, schedule, and rings. That's why every version I can say with a straight face starts with Butler's $54 million for the math, adds Kuminga for runway, stacks 4 firsts because history demands it, and then finishes with league-compliant ballast on our side to keep the 125% rule clean. It's not painless, it's adult. And if you ask me whether the Bucks say yes, the only true answer is only if the standings and the calendar co-sign, because teams don't voluntarily trade gravity, they surrender when forced. That's the cold air everyone's trying not to breathe when they float these ideas on TV. But let me bring you back to the court because that's where our case gets written. Tonight is a pure education for a team that wants to live in June. Can we guard for 18 seconds and finish the last 6 with a body and a board? Can we get to the line with grown man patience rather than hunting whistles? Can we keep our pace efficient instead of fast for its own sake? Can we make Giannis work every step without getting cynical about it? The answer's write the memo Bob Myers used to write on the flight home and Mike Dunleavy Jr. writes now. Hold, hunt, or wait and watch. And while we do, I want your voice in this because Dub Nation doesn't just react, it diagnoses. Would you part with one rotation favorite and an out-year first with real teeth to plug the exact late-round leak that keeps showing up? Or would you ride internal growth and hold a bullet for July? What's your closing 5 if this fantasy ever becomes an equation? Curry is off-ball gravity, Giannis is short-roll tyrant, Draymond is defensive thermostat, Butler is on-ball adult, Clay is spacing, or Moody is responsibility. Who tags at the nail? Who lives in the strong side corner? Who triggers late clock if Steph gets funneled? I'm going to feature the sharpest lineup logic because this community sees seams the national shows miss. Here's my concise analysis of the headline you came for, delivered straight. The confirmation I can put my name on tonight is not a handshake with the league office, it's the confirmation of viability and intent. If the Bucks season turns and Giannis asks out, the Warriors have a clean, cap-readal blueprint that marries basketball sense to financial reality. And it looks like Butler as the salary spine, Kuminga as the runway, 4 firsts as the oxygen, and precise ballast to satisfy 125%. The on-court fit is elite, the cultural shift is real, and the risk is measured by how hardened this current identity becomes over the next 8 weeks. That's the truth without perfume. And because I refuse to hide from the human part, as a lifelong Dub Nation believer, the image of Steph's gravity yanking 2 defenders out of the lane while Giannis detonates empty paint is a future I can feel in my bones. But I also know that the only thing you can't buy twice is trust, and this locker room is growing it in public, possession by possession. So tell me, family, before we land this, do you press the biggest button in franchise history if the Bucks blink? Or do you honor the climb we're watching and make the league solve your chemistry? Drop it below with a package you'd actually stomach and a closing 5 you'd actually deploy, and I'll be in there with you, heart in hand, arguing like it's a timeout. Final CTA, clear and direct. Like the video if this kind of sober with fire breakdown is your speed. Subscribe to Warriors News Fan Report. Ring the bell so you feel every beat from the Bay to the Chase Center. And share this with the diehard in your group chat, who text play diagrams at midnight, because the second this rumor lane shifts even an inch, I'll be back with the cap math, the lineup ripple, and the playoff grade plan to keep us a step ahead.